Welcome to the Guitar Channel. I am super happy to welcome you a new video. I am with Michael Greenfield in Montreal. Michael, how are you doing?
Still great.
Still great?
From last year.
Yeah. So we are here in the middle of your wonderful workshop. Tell us what happens here.
This is my machine room. It's exactly what it sounds like. It's a room full of woodworking machinery. There isn't really anything special or specific to guitar making. Okay. It's the area where I take large pieces of wood and prepare them into more manageable pieces to make guitars. For instance, this piece of mahogany, before it was cut into smaller pieces, the boards were about 4 meters long by about 75 or 80 centimeters wide. Okay. So really huge boards of very old growth mahogany. And in this room I can cut them into pieces that will eventually make necks. I saw pieces of exotic tropical woods to make sides and backs for guitars, prepare the soundboards. I do a lot of sanding in here. A lot of the shaping of the parts that I use are all sanded, poncé, you know.
Yeah. And so let's talk some more about this huge piece of wood that you can see here. So it's ready to be cut into pieces to make neck, or you are still waiting for it to settle down?
This piece of wood was actually very, very old when we got it to begin with. Okay. I did a purchase with a number of my colleagues a few years ago, maybe four or 5 years ago. A group of us, Linda Manzer and Grit Laskin, David Wren, and a few others. We bought collectively a few thousand board feet of this very old mahogany, and it's been in my workshop since then, and I don't know how old it was when we got it.
You don't have any rough estimate of how old?
No, I don't. Okay. We have a wood supplier who we've been dealing with for many, many years, and actually they've been dealing with much longer than I have, but he's been selling wood to guitar makers for over 40 years. So he knows exactly the specifications that we look for. And we put it to him that as a group we were interested in buying some mahogany. And he said, okay. And time went by, and then one day the telephone rang. I found some stuff.
I have something for you. Come and get it.
Yeah, it's actually an interesting, a little bit of an interesting story. He had an order for a furniture maker who wanted several thousand board feet of mahogany, and he found this pattern grade, very old Honduran mahogany, and at the same time he was able to buy more. So he added a few, like 2,000 board feet more for us to divide up. And the furniture maker wasn't terribly concerned about the grain orientation, but for us as guitar makers, and specifically for neck stock, the grain orientation of the board is extremely important. So we were able to go in ahead of everybody else and go through all those thousands of board feet and pick out the very best boards with the grain oriented exactly in the direction that we wanted to. So we got amazing material, and then it was cut into smaller pieces, and it was shipped here to my workshop, and everybody got their material in their workshop as well. And now it's sitting here. I haven't actually even begun to use this stuff. I'm still using my old stock. I should be into this next year. So let's say conservatively, it will have been in my workshop for 5 years before I even begin to mill it into lumber. And it could have been a year before we got it. I know that because I tested the humidity. It was very dry. It was about 7% when I got it.
Yeah, that's a question I have. When you talk about doing the selection, is it just by looking at the wood and say, okay, the grain is very straight, it's going to be good for neck, or do you test it with some specific tools and so on?
It's a visual inspection. You know, we did check the humidity, because if the humidity was very high and it dried too quickly, it would end up cracking all over the place. So it was properly dried. I really don't know if it was air dried or kiln dried when we got it, but it was fine and it was stable, and it still is. As far as purchasing lumber, it's a visual thing. You know, we look for straightness of grain, which may or may not indicate if the wood has run out. We try and look at the orientation of the grain, if it's straight across, which is referred to as flat sawn, or if it's vertical up and down grain, quarter sawn. To make necks, we want flat sawn, so that when you take the neck and you turn it, you end up with quarter sawn stock.
Okay.
So we picked out all the perfectly flat sawn boards, and that's what we have.
And what about the humidity level? Do you check it again before starting to work on this piece of wood, for example?
To be honest, not really, because I checked it when it came in, and it's not going to get wetter.
Okay.
So, you know, it's a matter of drying out. So I know it's stable.
Okay. And you make it sound very easy. Here we just cut pieces of take big pieces of wood and you make it to smaller. Can you tell us what really the expertise of the luthier to do this kind of job? Because it's not just, okay, I take a saw and I cut it, right?
Yeah, I think it's the same thing like playing the guitar.
Okay.
You know, anybody can pick up a guitar and go buy or never mind go buy, I'm showing how old I am. Go onto YouTube and watch somebody show you how to play a song and say, oh, I know these 3 chords, I'm a guitar player. The really good guitar players lock themselves in a room for 5 years or 10 years and practice for 6 hours, 8 hours, 10 hours a day. And all of a sudden they're genius musicians, you know. So I think it's very much the same way with any craft, and particular musical instrument making. You have to learn everything by making many guitars and making many mistakes and fixing them, or starting over, but studying with other, you know, mentors and learning the craft. And the woodworking part is the same. It's preferable if you come into the craft with woodworking experience ahead of time, but you have to learn how to use the tools beside all this wonderful machinery, which, you know, 25 years into my career I'm fortunate to have. I didn't start this way. I started in a very small shop of about 280 square meters, and I had one hand plane and a drill press and the bandsaw, and that was it. So, you know, over all the years, over all these years, I've come to the point where I have this wonderful space to work in.
I am always fascinated when I talk with luthier, because I read some books about how you work, and it seems that you are able, when you cut a piece of wood, to see how it reacts, or you need to have some kind of to let it rest for a moment to release all the tension. Can you talk about that a little?
Absolutely, and we can continue talking about necks, for instance. When I build a neck, it's over many years. First, as with this piece of wood, the lumber sits in the workshop for many years, and it continues to dry in season and acclimate to this space. But every time you cut wood or remove material from the wood, it releases internal stresses from the wood, and the wood will move. So I will take a large board like this, cut it into more manageable pieces, and then cut it into an oversized, rough shape of a guitar neck. And then I'll let it sit on the shelf for 6 months or a year, let it stabilize, and then I'll perform another procedure, truing up the surface, you know, making the surface flat, that will eventually have the fingerboard glued to it. And it's this process of constantly working the wood, letting it relax, work the wood a little bit more, letting it relax. And after doing that for a long period of time, what it does is helps the neck be as stable as possible. So when you deliver the finished product, the client is comfortable knowing that this is going to be a stable neck that hopefully isn't going to move around a lot.
Okay. And when you do this kind of rough cutting of the neck, do you have sometimes bad surprises where, okay, this leg is completely gone off off the chart and it's not going to be usable anymore?
Yes, it's just part of the it's part of the craft. You have a piece of wood and you don't know what's inside. You know, there were bugs living in there. It was a tree, so there was bugs or little animals, or sometimes there are worms that were living inside. And you open up the piece of wood and that's it. So you know, it's not necessarily wasted, but because depending on the size of the piece, we can cut it up into smaller pieces to use for the internal blocks inside the guitar. And sometimes it's scrap, and that's just part of what we do.
If we try to divide the amount of time you spend on the guitar, how much time do you spend here as a percentage? as a, let's say 100% is the total time you spend on a guitar?
Oh, it's hard to say. You know, in the preparation of the materials, it's very little. It's maybe 5 or 10%. You know, it's again, this is large woodworking machinery that I take large pieces of lumber and I cut them into manageable pieces to actually build a guitar with. As far as some of the sanding equipment that's in here, some of the spindle sanders, which I'll show you after, and some of the flat surfaces, I do a lot of shaping on these. So it's part of the building process. I would say altogether maybe 30 or 40% of the time. But the actual, like the big machine work is maybe 5%.
Okay. And going back to the wood supplier, compared to when you started to build guitar, is it easier or more difficult to get the right wood to build the guitars?
I find it, you know, I don't know what my colleagues are saying. I imagine it's the same thing, but I'm finding it more difficult to find the quality wood that we used to be able to find 20 years ago. And I'm sure some of my mentors 40 years ago and 45 years ago, they had a much easier time of finding wood is available, but the quality isn't what it once was. I'm fortunate that over the last couple of decades, I have developed really wonderful relationships with some of my wood suppliers. And I pay a little bit more and I get the best. So I'm lucky to have that opportunity. Not everybody does. And I also know precisely what I'm looking for. So whenever possible, I go in person. You know.
Okay. I remember, I think last year you told me that you had some kind of special relationship with someone in Switzerland, right? Or a family who grows trees, or no, okay, this is really sounding wood. I don't know exactly the word. That's right?
Yeah, I still deal with them. I buy all of my it's Alpine spruce, right?
Okay.
Some people call it European spruce, German spruce. Depends where the tree was cut down. Yeah, there's a small family who have been harvesting musical instrument wood for a long time.
They know what kind of tree to look.
They supply guitar makers and violin and cello guys and contrabass guys. So, yeah, a lot of people buy from them. They're very, very good.
All right. Thank you for this interesting chronicle, Michael. Thank you.
My pleasure.